Today, the Spokane Police Department announced it has identified the man who killed 9-year-old Candy Rogers in 1959.
It was possibly the most well-known cold case in the city and the entire state.
9-year-old Candy Rogers left her West Central Spokane home on the afternoon of March 6, 1959 to sell campfire mints in and around her neighborhood. As the hours passed with no sign of her return, her family's hopelessness increased as they feared the worst. Then, after 2 grueling weeks and numerous massive searches, a heartbreaking discovery was made. Her lifeless body was found deep in the woods far from the familiar surroundings. Did she become lost in the woods and fall victim to a wild beast, or did she experience something even worse? Hi and welcome back to Mysterious Cases 007. If you are new here, please consider subscribing to Mysterious Cases 007 as it helps us motivate to create more intriguing content for you. Let's have a look at the oldest unsolved cold case of all time, the case of Candy Rogers. Now, let's investigate this enigma. Today's case will take us to Spokane, a city in the state of Washington in the United States. The Spokane River flows through the city's center, and it is known for its rich cultural past and natural beauty, making it a favorite destination for outdoor enthusiasts. Candy was born in the year 1950 to parents Elaine and Carl Rogers since she was an only child. Her parents greatly cherished her. At some point, Elaine and Carl's marriage came crashing down for unknown reasons, and this caused them to get divorced and go their separate ways. However, Candy remained in the city. The city is also famous for hosting the annual Lilac Festival, which celebrates the blooming of the city's signature flower. Everyone could see that Candy was developing into a bright, happy young woman with a promising future. However, nobody anticipated that a tragic event would soon take Candy's life and rock the entire community to its foundation. On March 6, 1959, Candy returned from school to the house. It was a Friday, and she was looking forward to spending time with her friends. Candy joined a group of young women selling chocolate door to door that fateful afternoon. What exactly transpired subsequently is unknown, but she never came home at around 5:30 p.m. Around 6 p.m., Elaine's anxiety increased and she was certain that something was wrong. She immediately told Candy's grandfather Stanley Newton about the situation because she knew it was unusual for Candy to stay outside this late. As the minutes passed slowly and seemed like hours to Elaine, she kept listening for the sound of Candy's footsteps approaching the house, but they never did. Other family members, friends, and neighbors were also informed that Candy had not returned home, and by 6:30 p.m., a small group of people had set out to look for her. They started by asking residents of the area if they knew where she was. Some said they had seen her earlier, walking around holding the boxes of campfire mints she was selling, but no one seemed to know where she might be right now. Although they were shaken by the close call, Newton and his friends quickly turned their focus back to finding Candy as the sky grew gloomier. Despite the challenges they faced while searching in the waning light, the men clung to the hope that Candy would be found safe and sound before nightfall. At some point, the authorities were also made aware of the missing girl. Soon, police officers and sheriff's deputies arrived. For each day that went by, the Candy remained gone. March 22, 1956. Marked 16 days since Candy had gone missing, and it was that day that she was found. That afternoon, 2 airmen named Howard Lawrence and Richard Bergen were out hunting woodchucks in a wooded area about 7 miles from where Candy had been last seen. Elaine had become a shadow of herself, refusing to eat, and would constantly stare into space. More than 1,000 searchers who had volunteered their time, resources, and energy to look for Candy were shocked by the news. There was a general sense of dread in the air, and many people started to fear for their safety as well as their children's safety at that point. Elaine lost consciousness and had to be put under sedation. The autopsy of Candy's body found that she had been abused before being strangled to death, prompting the Spokane Police Department to launch an investigation to identify the perpetrator. We'll put every guy available on the case and keep them there until the matter is resolved. The first person the authorities suspected of committing the crime was an imprisoned serial killer by the name of Hugh Byron Morse, and they had good reason to believe that he had something to do with it when the autopsy on Candy's body was performed. Police Chief Clifford Payne had told the media at the time that "We know what we're looking for now, we're looking for a maniac," he added. Candy was eventually laid to rest, and her grieving family members hoped that her killer would be brought to justice as soon as possible. However, months passed after this, and the case remained a difficult one for detectives to solve. In June 1963, for years after Candy's death, her father Carl tragically committed suicide because he was unable to cope with losing his daughter. It was an exciting time for detectives as they felt closer than ever to cracking the case when forensic experts promptly set to work and discovered that Candy's underwear had on it. They were able to isolate DNA from this and use it to establish a DNA profile. In 2002, detectives compared the DNA profile to that of Morse, who had been on their radar for a while, but to their disappointment, they discovered that he was not the man they were looking for. Nothing of interest would surface for a long time, and in September 2006, Candy's heartbroken mother quietly passed away in her home at the age of 82. Around the time of her passing in 2017, forensic genetic genealogy emerged as a cutting-edge scientific technique being applied to a number of cold cases. She passed away without learning who killed her beloved daughter. The technique, which is gaining popularity, employs DNA analysis and conventional genealogical techniques to solve crimes and find missing people. In other words, it combines science and family history research to piece together clues and deliver justice to victims and their loved ones. Detectives made the decision to use it in an effort to help them solve Candy's murder. When a DNA sample that had been kept in the crime lab freezer since 2001 became available, Brittany Wright, a forensic scientist with the Washington State Patrol Crime Laboratory Division, was assigned to the case. The sample was then reanalyzed to ensure that it matched the 2001 DNA profile of the original offender. Once this was confirmed, she conducted a diagnostic analysis to see if it could be used for forensic genetic genealogy. The sample was then sent to a private forensic lab, but this effort proved to be fruitless because the lab determined that the DNA sample was too degraded to work with. The detectives' hopes were completely dashed by the news, and they could hardly conceal their disappointment. After this, a year would pass before detectives would have a fortunate break. They learned about a specific lab that could effectively work with deteriorated DNA like the one in Candy's case. The lab was called Othram and it was situated in Texas. Brittany contacted them to see if Candy's case was eligible after receiving a positive response. She then sent off a small amount of the remaining DNA sample for testing. A result from the lab was returned 6 months later. John Andrew, Terry Hoff, and another brother were named as potential suspects, but it turned out that all three had long since passed away. After conducting further research, detectives learned that one of the men was one of the three brothers. When they learned that John had a daughter named Kathy, they decided to look up the young girl who had been murdered in 1959 so they knew who it was. Kathy said she gave detectives a DNA sample, which was then analyzed. The result was astounding. It showed that Kathy's DNA was 2.9 million times more likely to be related to the suspect DNA profile than the general population with this detective. After serving 6 months in prison, John was discharged from the army as a deserter and led a relatively normal life working as a door-to-door salesman and in a lumber yard to make ends meet. However, at the age of 31, John ended up committing suicide. Detectives also discovered a possible relationship between John and Candy. They thought that John may have known Candy because Hoff's stepsister, who was a 10-year-old little girl at the time of Candy's death, had assumed the role of Candy's older sister in the program. With Kathy's consent and a search warrant, they went to the cemetery where Jean was buried and exhumed his body. A DNA sample was then taken from his remains and was sent to the lab for testing. The result was what detectives anticipated. John was Candy's killer. "We got extremely lucky in that we got DNA from 1959. Said former Spokane police detective. "It's not a resolution, but at least there is some satisfaction knowing that the perpetrator is at least recognized. He may be buried, but he is known," said Hammond, who also stated that some of Candy's surviving relatives were contacted and informed about the breakthrough. Nonetheless, Candy's family members continued to be grieved by the idea that her grandparents and parents never learned who killed her. They never saw him pay for it or die for it or whatever. And that was difficult. It's just incredibly awful to learn that someone, other than just your dad, but someone in your family, could do something like that, according to Joanne, who stated that Kathy was shaken to her very core by the revelation that her father was the murderer. Kathy also apologized publicly for her father's crime and the suffering it caused the murdered girl's family. She said she is very, very sorry for what her dad did, that he took her life horribly. Kathy said John passed away when she was only 9 and she grew up believing that he had done it out of depression. She said it wasn't an escape and away from it, but he got to die with people. Do you believe John's murder of Candy was pre-planned or was it a random act? Share your opinion in the comments section, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. A family was thrown into misery and remained in the dark for more than 60 years, but the determination and perseverance of several generations of detectives helped to reveal his identity and bring the bereaved family much-needed closure.